You know, the world around us is constantly changing. Food cooks, iron rusts, milk goes sour. All of these things are transformations, little mysteries happening right in front of our eyes. In this explainer, we're going to become chemical detectives. We're going to learn how to decode the story behind all these changes. Our first case kicks off with a simple strip of metal, a magnesium ribbon. Now, when you burn it, it doesn't just glow or turn black like you might expect. Oh no, it erupts in this brilliant, dazzling white flame that's so bright you almost have to look away. And after that intense flash of light, what's left is just this crumbly white powder. The shiny metal? It's gone. So the big question is, what is actually happening here? This is the mystery at the heart of our investigation. Okay, let's get our detective hats on and dive into this. We're going to treat this reaction as our first case file, the mystery of the dazzling flame. We have our evidence, the before and the after. Now we just need to figure out how that transformation happened. So the first big clue is realizing that the white powder isn't just burnt metal. No way. It's a completely new substance. The magnesium has actually combined with oxygen from the air around it to create something totally different, magnesium oxide. A true transformation has taken place. So if we saw this happening, how would we know for sure it was a chemical reaction and not just, well, something getting hot? Like any good detective, we need to learn how to spot the evidence. And believe me, there are some classic telltale signs that a chemical change is going down. And here they are, our 4 key clues, the smoking guns of a chemical reaction. First, a change in state, a solid turning into a liquid or a gas. Second, a change in color that you didn't expect. Third, the evolution of a gas. You might see this as fizzing or bubbling. And finally, a change in temperature, where the reaction gets noticeably hotter or colder. Let's see this in action. In this flask, some zinc granules are being mixed with acid. And bam, we get 2 clues for the price of 1. See those bubbles? That's the evolution of a gas. In this case, hydrogen. And if you could touch that flask, you'd feel it getting warm. That's a clear change in temperature. Now, describing all these events is great, but let's be honest, it's a little wordy. Can you imagine writing a full paragraph for every single reaction you observe? There has to be a more efficient way to communicate all this, right? And you bet there is. Welcome to chemistry's secret shorthand. Scientists, being the efficient people they are, developed a really concise and universal language to describe these complex events clearly and quickly, and it's all about using equations. So instead of writing out that whole long sentence, scientists just use a simple, clean word equation. It tells us the exact same story, what you start with and what you end with, in a fraction of the space. So much better. And to understand this shorthand, you just need to know the players involved. The things you start with, in this case, magnesium and oxygen, are called the reactants. And the new substance it's created, magnesium oxide, is the product. That little arrow always points from the reactants to the products, just to show the direction of the change. Simple. But we can take this code even further. Word equations are good, but chemists are all about efficiency. To make the language truly universal and even more powerful, we use chemical formulas instead of words. And this is what that looks like. Mg plus O2 yields MgO. I mean, look how compact and precise that is. Every single symbol has a specific meaning. This is the ultimate chemical shorthand, and it's called a skeletal chemical equation. But hold on, there's a problem. Our neat little equation, just as it's written there, is actually breaking one of the most fundamental laws of the entire universe. And to be scientifically accurate, you gotta follow the rules. And that rule is the law of conservation of mass. This law is a really big deal. It's non-negotiable. It means that in any chemical reaction, the total amount of stuff you start with absolutely must equal the total amount of stuff you end with. Atoms can't just appear out of nowhere or vanish into thin air. So let's put our equation on trial and do a quick atom count. On the left-hand side, the reactants, we've got 1 magnesium atom and 2 oxygen atoms. Okay, but on the right-hand side, the product, we have 1 magnesium and, whoa, only 1 oxygen. One of our oxygen atoms has just vanished. This equation is unbalanced, and that means it's breaking the law. So how do we fix this? We use a kind of fun puzzle-solving process called the hit-and-trial method. We can't change the substances themselves. That would be like changing the evidence. But what we can do is change the amounts of each substance by adding numbers out front, called coefficients. It's all about tweaking the recipe until the atom inventory is balanced on both sides. And ta-da! Here's the solution. To balance it, we just place a 2 in front of the Mg on the left and a 2 in front of the MgO on the right. Now let's recount. 2 magnesiums on the left, 2 on the right. Check. 2 oxygens on the left and 2 on the right. Perfect. It is perfectly balanced. The law of conservation is happy. Case closed. Okay, so now that we can read and write the language of chemical reactions, we can start to organize them. Just like a detective sorts case files by type, chemists classify reactions based on the patterns they follow. And it turns out our magnesium mystery is a perfect example of a combination reaction. The name really says it all. It's any reaction where 2 or more reactants combine to form one single, more complex product. Think of it as A plus B coming together to make AB. And the exact opposite is also a super common pattern. That's a decomposition reaction. This is where a single, complex compound breaks down into 2 or more simpler things, usually when you add energy, like heat. It's the pattern of AB breaking apart into A and D. When you see them side by side, the contrast is crystal clear. Combination reactions build complexity. They take simple ingredients and make a single new thing. Decomposition reactions do the opposite. They take one complex thing and break it down into its simpler parts. It's the fundamental difference between building up and breaking down. So there you have it. You've now learned the detective's toolkit for chemistry. You can spot the clues, you can read the secret shorthand, and you can recognize the fundamental patterns of how our world changes. You've cracked the code. So the next time you see rust forming or a cake baking in the oven, ask yourself, what other transformations can you now decipher?
You know, there's this invisible force all around us and even inside us right this second. It's the hidden chemistry of acids and bases, and today, we're going to make it visible. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Sounds like a weird riddle, right? But believe it or not, there's a really powerful chemical connection between all three. So stick with me, because we're about to solve this exact mystery.
So, where do we even begin to crack this case? Well, the very first clues are actually hiding in plain sight, right in our kitchens. And they start with our own sense of taste.
Honestly, it starts out this simple. You know that sour pucker you get from a lemon or some vinegar? Yep, that's an acid. And yeah, we've all been there, that awful, sharp, bitter taste if you ever got soap in your mouth. That's a base. These are our first, most direct clues.
All right, let's talk about that upset stomach. We've all felt that heartburn, that acidic feeling after a huge meal. And what's the classic home remedy? A little bit of baking soda and water. But why does that actually work so well? It's not magic, it's chemistry in action.
And this right here is the key. It's a concept called neutralization. Acids and bases are basically chemical opposites. They have this incredible power to just cancel each other out. The baking soda, which is a base, gets in there and calms down all that extra stomach acid. It's a perfect balancing act.
Okay, so obviously we can't, and please definitely shouldn't, go around tasting things to figure out what they are. So how do we make this invisible property visible? Well, we need to call in some chemical detectives.
And these detectives are called indicators. An indicator is just a special substance that literally changes color when it meets an acid or a base. It's like a visual alarm that tells you exactly what you're dealing with. You've probably heard of the most famous one, litmus paper. The rule is a classic for a reason. Acids turn blue litmus paper red. Bases turn red litmus paper blue. Simple as that, right?
But this isn't just some boring lab stuff. Indicators are in your laundry room. Think about it. You get a curry stain on a white shirt. The turmeric in that curry is a natural indicator. As soon as you scrub it with soap, which is a base, that yellow stain turns this reddish-brown color. Bam! You're watching a chemical reaction on your clothes.
And it turns out there's a whole world of these indicators. You've got natural ones, synthetic ones, but get this, and this is my favorite part. Some indicators work by smell. They're called olfactory indicators, and they actually change their scent depending on if they're in an acid or a base. How wild is that?
All right, so we've got identification down. Now let's get to the really fun part. What happens when we actually start mixing these things together? It's time to see some chemistry in action.
So let's start with a big, fundamental question. Acid meets metal. What's going to happen?
So check out this setup. It's pretty simple. We've got a test tube with some sulfuric acid, and we're about to drop in a few little pieces of zinc. Any guesses on what we're about to see?
All right, here we go. The zinc drops in, and right away, fizzing. Bubbles of gas start forming everywhere. So we collect that gas, run it through some soap solution to make bubbles, and then, for the grand finale, we bring a lit candle close and pop. You get this cool little popping sound.
That pop isn't just for show. That is the signature telltale test for hydrogen gas. And what we just saw proves a fundamental rule of chemistry. When an acid reacts with a metal, you get a salt and hydrogen gas. We didn't just see it happen, we proved it.
Okay, so we've seen how they taste, how to find them, and how they react. But we're still missing the biggest piece of the puzzle. What is the fundamental secret that makes an acid in the first place? It's time to unlock the code.
So let's ask the big question. All these different acids, they taste sour, they react with metals, they turn litmus red. There has to be one single thing that connects them all, right? What is the secret ingredient?
And here it is. The one thing every single acid has in common is the hydrogen ion, or H+. When you dissolve an acid in water, it releases these tiny charged particles. And the number of these little H+ ions floating around is what gives an acid all its characteristic properties.
And you guessed it, bases have their own version, the hydroxide ion, or OH-. So this whole time, this entire invisible world of acids and bases, it really just boils down to a story about these two tiny ions, H+ and OH-.
So if it's all about how many of these ions are in a solution, how do we measure that? Well, that's where the famous pH scale comes into play. You've heard the term a million times, but now you know what it's really measuring, the power of hydrogen.
It's a pretty simple scale, from 0 to 14. Right smack in the middle at 7 is neutral. Think pure water. If you go down from 7, you're in acid territory, and the lower the number, the stronger the acid. And if you go up from 7, you're dealing with a base, and the higher the number, the stronger it is.
Let's put some real numbers to this. A super strong acid like hydrochloric acid is way down at a pH of 1. The lemon juice in your glass is around 2.2. And look at this, even regular tap water can be slightly basic, around 8. Then you've got a powerful base like sodium hydroxide all the way at the top, at 14. This scale just makes it all click into place.
And why does any of this matter? Well, because this delicate balance governs life itself. Our bodies have to stay in this super narrow pH window between 7.0 and 7.8 just to keep running. And you've heard of acid rain, right? That's just the pH of rainwater dropping, which can have huge consequences for our environment. This balance is absolutely critical.
So there you have it. From the food we eat to the soap we use, from our own bodies to the health of our planet, it all comes back to this invisible dance of acids and bases. So now that you know the secret, the story of the H+ and OH- ions, what invisible chemistry are you going to notice around you today?
Today, we're diving into an atomic showdown, metals versus nonmetals. Now, we all think we've got a handle on what a metal is, right? It's shiny, it's strong, but what if I told you the real story? The secret identity is buried deep down at the atomic level. Okay, so the first thing we always do, right? It's the eye test. You pick something up, and the first question that pops into your head is it shiny? Does it have that classic, unmistakable metallic glint? And then, of course, you're going to ask, is this thing strong? Is it tough? Could I, build something with it? And then there's the big one, the classic test, does it conduct electricity? But here's the thing, what if I told you that all of this, the shine, the strength, it's all just the surface story? The real difference is hidden way, way deeper. All right, let's get into it. What is a metal, really? We're going to go way beyond just what it looks like and uncover this hidden story that's all about how atoms behave. Okay, so let's start with the obvious stuff, the physical showdown. These are the traits we can actually see and touch, the classic clues we use to spot a metal out in the wild. Yeah, we're talking about all the usual suspects here. That metallic shine, the fact that they conduct heat and electricity, that satisfying ring they make when you tap them. But for now, let's really zoom in on two of their key superpowers. Two words you probably remember from science class: malleability and ductility. First up, malleability. This is basically a metal's superpower to be hammered or pressed into these incredibly thin sheets without just shattering into a million pieces. Think about a blacksmith hammering out a sword, or hey, even just the aluminum foil you wrap your leftovers in. And believe me, some metals take this to a whole other level. I mean, did you know that gold and silver are the most malleable metals out there? They can be beaten into sheets so thin, they're just a few atoms thick. It's wild. Okay, so moving on from that, we have its close cousin, ductility. This is the ability to be stretched and pulled out into a thin wire. And this one is absolutely crucial for, well, pretty much all of our electrical wiring. And if you want to see just how ridiculously extreme this property can get, check this out. A single gram of gold, just 1 gram, can be stretched into a wire that's 2 kilometers long. No joke, that is just mind-blowing ductility. So, okay. It feels like we're building a pretty clear picture, right? Metals are hard. They're strong. Nonmetals, on the other hand, they tend to be soft or they're brittle. They just break. Seems pretty straightforward. But is it really that simple? Is that always true? Can we just rely on these physical properties to tell us the whole story? Yeah, not so fast, because then you meet the alkali metals. You see, metals like sodium and potassium are so ridiculously soft you can literally cut them with a butter knife. And this is our first big clue that there's something much deeper going on here than just physical toughness. Okay, so if the physical properties have all these exceptions, we've got to dig deeper. Let's move on and look at what you might call their chemical personality, how they behave, how they react with the world around them. This is where the real differences start to pop. Just take how they react with water, for example. It's a perfect showcase of their different personalities. Sodium, you drop it in cold water and it reacts violently. It literally catches fire. Magnesium is a bit calmer. It needs hot water to get going. Iron is even more chill. It will only react with steam. And then you've got gold, which does absolutely nothing. No reaction at all. Now, this huge spectrum of behavior, from explosive to completely inert, it's not random at all. In fact, scientists have organized all of this into a kind of chemical ladder. It's a really powerful tool that helps us rank the metals and even predict how they're going to react. And this is it, the reactivity series. You can basically think of it as a league table for metals. Up at the top, you've got the most reactive, most aggressive players, like potassium and sodium. They are just desperate to react with something. And then way, way down at the bottom, you have the super calm, unreactive metals like silver and gold. So this table is amazing for telling us what's going to happen in a reaction, but it doesn't answer the biggest question of all. Why? Why is potassium so eager to react while gold just sits there completely unfazed? Well, to answer that, we have to look inside their atoms. And here we are, the final section, the ultimate secret. It turns out that all of these properties we've been talking about, both the physical and the chemical ones, they're all driven by one single, incredibly simple goal. You see, the number one goal of pretty much every atom in the universe is to be stable. And what does stability mean for an atom? It means having a completely full outer shell of electrons. They all want to be like the cool kids of the periodic table, the noble gases, who are perfectly stable and unreactive. And it really all comes down to this simple game of electrons. Take a metal like sodium. It has one lonely single electron in its outer shell. So for sodium, the easiest way to get stable is to just get rid of that one electron. But then you look at a nonmetal like chlorine. It's got 7 outer electrons, so it's desperately trying to gain just one more to complete its set of 8. So this basically sets the stage for what I like to call the great electron heist. You've got sodium, who desperately needs to lose 1 electron, and you've got chlorine, who desperately needs to gain 1. So what happens? It's a perfect match. Sodium just gives its electron to chlorine. Now suddenly, both atoms have that full, stable outer shell they've always wanted. They're happy. But in the process, they become charged ions, and their opposite charges lock them together in this super strong bond, and that's how you get sodium chloride, which we all know as table salt. And that, right there, is the true secret, the essence of what makes a metal a metal. It isn't really about being shiny or strong or any of that. It's all about having 1, 2, or 3 extra electrons in that outer shell that you are more than willing. In fact, you're eager to give away, all in the name of stability. That is the core of their entire identity. So, let's leave you with this final thought. The next time you see a piece of iron rusting, don't just think of it as decay. Think about what's really happening. You're actually watching millions upon millions of individual iron atoms willingly sacrificing their electrons to the oxygen in the air, all part of that endless fundamental quest for atomic stability. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the story of one of the most important elements in the entire universe, carbon. I mean, it's in the food we eat, the clothes we wear. It is the very foundation of all life as we know it. But let's kick things off with a pretty surprising number. That right there, that's the amount of carbon in the Earth's crust. Just a tiny, tiny fraction. The atmosphere has even less, about 0.03%, mostly as carbon dioxide. So that creates this really fascinating puzzle that we're going to try and solve. How can something so incredibly scarce be so absolutely essential, the backbone of every single living thing on the planet? To really understand carbon's power, we've got to look at how it connects with other atoms. Turns out, the secret is all in the bond. Okay, so let's compare 2 different types of compounds here. On one side, you've got ionic compounds, like table salt. They have really high melting points and they conduct electricity when they're dissolved. But then you look at carbon compounds, and they are the complete opposite. Low melting points, and they're terrible conductors. This huge difference is a massive clue that something fundamentally different is going on with how their atoms are held together. So here's the deal. Carbon has 4 electrons in its outer shell, and it really wants to have 8 to be stable. But this puts it in a tough spot. Gaining 4 more electrons, well, its nucleus just isn't strong enough to hold on to them. Losing 4 electrons, that takes a ridiculous amount of energy. So since neither option is any good, carbon came up with a really clever solution. It doesn't give or take electrons at all. Instead, it shares. And this sharing creates what we call a covalent bond. It's a strong, stable connection where atoms basically hold hands and share their electrons. This doesn't create any charged particles or ions, which perfectly explains why carbon compounds are such poor electrical conductors. See, it all connects. All right, so now that we get how carbon bonds, let's pull back the curtain on the 2 unique properties that make it so incredibly special. You can think of these as its superpowers. First up is something called catenation. It's a fancy word, but it just means carbon has this amazing ability to link up with itself over and over, forming these super strong and stable chains and rings. Seriously, think of it like Lego bricks that can just keep clicking together in a nearly infinite number of ways. No other element can do this quite like carbon. Superpower number 2 is tetravalency. Again, sounds complex, but it's simple. Tetra means 4. Since carbon has 4 of those outer electrons to share, it can form 4 strong bonds at the same time. This makes it an unbelievably versatile building block, able to connect in all directions. So when you put those 2 superpowers together, catenation and tetravalency, that's the magic formula. That's what allows carbon to build this incredible, mind-boggling variety of molecular structures. Let's take a look at what that architecture actually looks like. At its simplest, catenation lets carbon create these nice, straight chains of hydrocarbons. You start with 1 carbon, that's methane. Link 2 together, you get ethane. 3 gives you propane, and you can just keep going, building longer and longer molecules. But here's where it gets really, really interesting. Carbon doesn't have to just stick to making straight lines. You can take the same number of atoms and arrange them in completely different ways. So, check this out. Take the formula C4H10. You can arrange the atoms in a straight 4-carbon chain, or you can make this cool branched structure you see on the right. They have the exact same chemical formula, so they're both technically butane, but because they're shaped differently, we call them structural isomers, and they have different physical properties. The shape changes everything. And, it doesn't stop there. Not even close. Carbon atoms can loop back on themselves to form super stable rings, like cyclohexane. They can also form double or even triple bonds, creating a whole different class of compounds we call unsaturated, like the famous benzene ring. The architectural possibilities are just immense. Now, if you want to see just how dramatic this structural variety can be, you have to look at carbon's allotropes. These are different forms of the exact same element, but with wildly different properties. It really all boils down to this simple idea. The only thing separating the soft, gray graphite in your pencil from the hardest, most brilliant diamond is how their carbon atoms are arranged. It's the same element, just with a different blueprint. And this is the perfect example of how structure dictates function. Just look at the properties. Diamond's hardness is completely off the charts. It's the hardest substance we know. Graphite, on the other hand, is incredibly soft. But here's the kicker. While diamond is an insulator, graphite is a good conductor of electricity, all because of how the atoms are arranged. So here's why. In a diamond, every single carbon atom is locked into this super rigid 3D lattice with 4 others. It's an unbreakable network. But in graphite, the atoms are arranged in these flat, hexagonal sheets. The sheets themselves are strong, but they're weakly bonded to each other, so they can easily slide past one another. That's what makes graphite feel slippery. And as if that wasn't enough, scientists later discovered a third major form, fullerenes. In this case, the carbon atoms form a hollow sphere, famously shaped just like a soccer ball. This one is called Buckminster fullerene, or more commonly, a buckyball. So all of this brings us right back to our initial puzzle. Catenation, tetravalency, and this incredible ability to form endless chains, branches, and rings allow carbon to form millions of known compounds, which, by the way, far outnumbers the compounds of all other elements combined. So the key takeaway is this. Carbon's mastery of sharing electrons through covalent bonds and its unique ability to link with itself gives it an unmatched chemical toolkit. Its rarity in the crust is completely overcome by its incredible versatility, making it the perfect foundation for the complexity of life. And that leaves us with one final thought. From creating new medicines to engineering revolutionary new materials, the possibilities hidden within this truly fundamental element are still being discovered. So you have to wonder, with a chemical toolkit this powerful, what are we going to build with carbon next? So what's really the difference between something like a rock and a living cell? It seems like a pretty simple question, right? But the answer? Well, it goes way deeper than anything we can just see with our own eyes. Let's dig in and explore what it truly means to be alive. I mean, really think about it for a second. We see a dog running around, a plant growing towards the sun, and we know they're alive. But what about when the dog is sleeping, or when the plant's growth is so slow we can't even perceive it? The clues we usually depend on are almost all visual, but are they actually reliable? Okay, so let's start right there with those visible clues. For most of human history, this is pretty much all we had to work with, and it seems straightforward enough. But as we're about to find out, our eyes can be a little, misleading when it comes to pinning down a definition for life. So is movement the big sign? It seems like a great place to start, but then you think a car moves and we know for sure it's not alive. And on the flip side, a plant can look perfectly still, but it is absolutely alive. Its life is just playing out on a totally different timescale, one that's way too slow for us to notice. So yeah, movement by itself, that can't be the answer. All right then, what about breathing? We see a sleeping person's chest rise and fall, and that's a clear sign. But lots of organisms, like fish for example, don't show any obvious breathing movements. And some living things don't really breathe in a way we'd recognize at all. So that clue doesn't quite hold up either. So here's the bottom line. Just relying on what we can see, well, it isn't going to cut it. The true universal sign of life is actually happening on a scale that is completely invisible to us. The real story isn't visible. It's molecular. And this is where we get to the real science of it all. To find the answer, we have to zoom in. I mean, way, way in, to the microscopic world where the real work of being alive is happening. This is the molecular engine that powers every single living thing. So here's what biologists have landed on. The one definitive sign of life is this constant, invisible shuffling of molecules. It's this non-stop process of repair and maintenance. In fact, this is the very reason viruses are so debated. They don't show any molecular movement on their own. They have to hijack the machinery of a living cell to do the work for them. And this really gets to the core challenge of being alive. See, living things are these incredibly organized structures, but the world around them, the environment, is constantly trying to break that order down. So you could say that life is just one long, continuous fight to maintain structure against chaos. So how does any organism possibly win this fight? Well, it's definitely not by accident. Every single living thing has this kind of built-in maintenance crew, a set of essential jobs that it absolutely must perform all the time just to hold itself together. And here they are, the 4 big jobs for staying alive. These are non-negotiable. First, you've got to get fuel from the outside world. That's nutrition. Second, you have to turn that fuel into usable energy. That's respiration. Third, you need to move that energy and all those materials where they need to go. We call that transportation. And finally, you have to get rid of the toxic junk left over. That's excretion. To really get a handle on how this all works, let's zoom in on just one of these jobs, nutrition. By actually following the journey of energy from the outside world into a living body, we can see this whole molecular engine in action. Now, when it comes to getting that fuel, there are basically 2 main strategies in the game of life. You've got your autotrophs, the self-feeders like plants. They literally make their own food from simple stuff like sunlight and carbon dioxide. And then you've got heterotrophs, the other feeders. And yep, that's us. We have to eat other living things to get our energy. And since we can't just make our own food, our survival depends entirely on having this highly specialized internal factory, a whole system designed specifically to take complex food from the outside and break it down into the tiny building blocks our bodies can actually use. And here it is, our very own internal factory, the human alimentary canal. I know it might look like a complicated mess of tubes, but it's really just one super long, incredibly sophisticated tube. And every single section of this tube has a very specific job to do in the amazing process of turning your lunch into, well, you. The whole journey kicks off in the mouth, where your saliva starts breaking down starches right away. From there, it heads to the stomach, which uses powerful acid to start working on proteins. But the real magic, the main event, happens in the small intestine. This is where all the different food types are finally completely broken down into their essential molecules, which are then absorbed into your bloodstream, ready to be shipped off wherever your body needs to build, repair, or get a boost of energy. Okay, so let's zoom back out for a minute. We've seen how nutrition works, but it's really important to remember why this whole process is even necessary. It all comes back to that constant, relentless battle against breakdown. And this work, this maintenance, it isn't just for when we're running around or being active. It is absolutely relentless. The process of maintaining your body's structure, of keeping everything in order, is happening every single second of every single day, whether you're running a marathon or you're totally passed out asleep. It never, ever stops. So this leads us to the fundamental truth of it all. Being alive isn't a passive state, like being a statue. It's an incredibly active, energy-demanding process. This constant, ongoing work of self-maintenance and repair, that's what life is. So if life is this constant process of rebuilding, then every single meal you eat is basically a delivery of raw materials to your body's personal construction site. Which leads to a pretty interesting question, doesn't it? What kind of fuel are you choosing for this incredible, nonstop work?
Whether it's a cat chasing a mouse or just a simple houseplant reaching for a bit of sunlight, every living thing shares this one fundamental challenge. It has to respond to the world around it to survive. And this isn't just random, chaotic movement. Oh no, it's a carefully controlled, perfectly coordinated dance. So today, we're going to dive into the absolutely incredible systems that make all of this possible.
I mean, really think about it for a second. You snatch your hand away from a hot stove in a split second, way before you even have time to think, ouch. Meanwhile, that plant on your windowsill is slowly but very deliberately bending itself towards the light. These 2 actions seem like they're from different planets, right? But they're both solving the exact same problem, reacting to a stimulus. So, how on earth do they do it?
All right, here's our game plan. We're going to start with why a response system is so essential for everyone. Then, we'll get into the weeds of the animal nervous system and its amazing reflex shortcut. After that, we'll figure out how plants pull this off without any nerves at all. And finally, we'll look at the chemical messengers, the hormones, that kind of connect both of these worlds.
So here's the absolute key. Any movement in response to the environment has to be controlled. It's not enough to just move. An organism has to recognize a change like, hey, there's food, or whoa, that's a threat. And then it has to trigger the right kind of movement. And that requires some seriously sophisticated systems of control and coordination built from very specialized tissues.
For animals, the #1 solution is the nervous system. The best way to picture it is like a biological superhighway, an internal internet designed to zip information across the body at incredible speeds using electrical signals. It's the system that lets us have these rapid, complex, and super-targeted responses.
And at the very heart of this incredible network is one single, amazing cell, the neuron. The entire nervous system, the whole shebang, is built from these specialized cells. Each one is like a tiny biological wire, perfectly designed to carry information as an electrical impulse from one part of the body to another.
So how does a signal actually travel? Well, you can think of it like a tiny, super-fast relay race. First up, the dendrites act like the runner at the starting line. They grab the information. This kicks off an electrical impulse that just races down the axon, which is like the main track. Then, at the finish line, the signal has to be passed to the next neuron. And it does this by releasing a burst of chemicals across a tiny gap called the synapse. It's this beautiful dance of electricity and chemistry, and it all happens at lightning speed. Now, this network is ridiculously fast, but believe it or not, sometimes even it isn't fast enough. In those real-life or death moments, there is just no time for your brain to sit around, process information, and make a conscious call. The body needs a shortcut, an override.
This quote from our source material just nails the problem perfectly. If you actually had to think through the steps, okay, that surface is hot, it is causing me pain, I should probably move my hand now, you'd already have a serious burn. That whole thinking process, which involves all these complex networks in the brain, is just way too slow for an emergency.
And this is the solution, and it is brilliant. The reflex arc. It's basically a pre-wired emergency circuit. It connects the sensory nerves that feel the danger directly to the motor nerves that move your muscles, and it does it right inside the spinal cord. It completely bypasses the brain, giving you an almost instantaneous, totally involuntary reaction.
Let's just trace this pathway together. See here, a receptor in your skin screams hot. That signal zips along a sensory neuron straight to your spinal cord. But instead of taking the long trip up to the brain, it connects directly with a motor neuron right there. That motor neuron immediately fires a signal back to the muscle in your arm, telling it to contract now. You've already pulled your hand away before your brain has even fully registered the pain. That tiny fraction of a second is the entire point. It's the difference between a little red spot and a crippling injury. It is just an elegant, life-saving shortcut.
Okay, so animals have this lightning-fast electrical grid. Awesome. But what about plants? They face the same challenges, you know? They need to find light, find water, maybe avoid getting eaten. But they don't have nerves. They don't have muscles. So how in the world do they coordinate anything?
Well, it turns out plants basically have two main strategies in their playbook. The first one is fast and it's reversible. Think of the touch-me-not plant. It's all based on rapid changes in water pressure. The second strategy is way slower and it's permanent. It's a directional movement we call tropism, and it's caused by the plant literally growing in a specific direction.
And here's that first strategy in action. It's so cool. When you touch a sensitive plant, it sends this electrical chemical signal from cell to cell. This signal tells the cells at the base of the leaves to rapidly pump out water. That makes them go limp, causing the leaves to fold up almost instantly. It's a real physical movement, but it's powered by hydraulics, not muscles. Now, the more common type of plant movement is tropism. This is when the plant's actual growth is directed by something in the environment. Phototropism is growth towards light. That's why your seedling bends towards the window. And geotrophism is growth in response to gravity. It's why roots always grow down and the shoots always grow up. It's movement, but achieved through slow, deliberate construction.
So we've got the fast electrical network in animals and the slower growth-based movements in plants. They seem completely different. But what if there was a common language that they both used? Well, there is. Turns out both animals and plants rely on a second, much slower system of communication, chemical messengers, which you probably know as hormones.
See, those electrical signals from nerves are fantastic. They are incredibly fast and precise. But they have one big limitation. They can only talk to the cells they are physically wired to. Chemical signals are slower for sure, but they can travel through the bloodstream or just diffuse from one cell to the next, and they can potentially reach every single cell in the body. This allows for widespread, long-lasting effects. So let's go back to that plant bending towards the light. How does it actually do it? It uses a hormone called auxin. Auxin gets produced at the very tip of the shoot, and its job is to make cells get longer.
When light hits the plant from one side, the auxin moves over to the shady side. This makes the cells on that shady side grow longer and faster than the cells on the sunny side, and that imbalance is what physically causes the entire shoot to bend right towards the light. Pretty clever, huh?
And of course, animals use this chemical system for our own high-stakes situations. When danger pops up, the adrenal glands unleash an incredibly powerful hormone, adrenaline. This isn't just a message to one muscle, nope. This is a global alert, a system-wide call to arms for the entire body to prepare for intense physical action, what we all know as the fight or flight response.
And what does that global alert actually do? Well, your heart starts pounding, supercharging your muscles with oxygen. Your breathing rate skyrockets. Blood gets rerouted away from things that aren't important right now, like digestion, which frees up all that energy for your arms and legs. All of these very different responses, all perfectly coordinated by one single chemical signal, getting your body ready for peak performance when you need it most.
So let's just boil it all down. We've got two amazing systems working together. You have the nervous system giving you fast, targeted, and short-lived communication with electricity, and then you have the hormonal system, which provides slower, widespread, and much more persistent control using chemicals. Both are absolutely essential for coordinating everything a complex organism has to do.
When you really step back and look at the big picture, whether it's the instantaneous snap of a reflex or the patient, deliberate bending of a plant towards the sun, what you're really seeing is life in action. It's this constant, dynamic, and beautifully coordinated conversation between an organism and its world.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. When you look at these two incredibly different yet equally successful solutions to the exact same fundamental problem of survival, what does that tell you? What does this intricate, amazing control perfected over millions and millions of years reveal about the just elegant and powerful efficiency of evolution? All right, let's tackle one of the biggest questions out there. How does life, well, make more life? We're going to break down the incredible process of reproduction. I mean, it's pretty much a core mission for every living thing on Earth.
But before we get into the how, let's ask a more fundamental question. Why? Why even bother reproducing? I mean, think about it for a second. It's not like breathing or eating, right? An organism doesn't actually need to reproduce to stay alive. And what's more, it takes a ton of energy. So what's the deal? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple, but also really profound. The only reason we can even talk about a species, like say tigers or oak trees, is because there are a whole bunch of them. And that only happens through reproduction. So the core mission, when you boil it all down, is to make new individuals that are, well, pretty similar to their parents. It's all about keeping the family line, the species, going.
Okay, so how does that similarity even happen? How does a new organism know how to be a tiger or an oak tree? Well, it all comes down to the blueprint. Tucked away inside the nucleus of a cell is the master instruction manual for building a body, and that's DNA. This is the critical information that gets copied and passed down, telling the next generation exactly what to do. And that idea of copying the blueprint leads us right into our first major strategy. See, some organisms create whole new generations from just a single individual. It's a process that's all about making copies, and we call it asexual reproduction. And let me tell you, nature has gotten really creative with this. There are so many fascinating ways to pull it off. We're going to look at a few of the coolest methods, from something as simple as just splitting in two to growing a whole new organism from just a tiny piece. So let's start with the most straightforward method out there, fission. This is the classic move for a lot of single-celled organisms. You take something like an amoeba, it just makes a copy of all its important stuff, its DNA and all that, and then, poof, it splits right down the middle. One cell becomes two. Super simple and super effective.
Then you've got something a bit different, a really cool process called budding. Organisms like Hydra, they'll actually use special cells to grow a tiny mini-me right off the side of their own body. This little bud just grows and grows, and when it's mature enough, it just detaches and goes off to live its own life. Wild, right?
And this whole idea ties into one of nature's honest-to-goodness superpowers, regeneration. Seriously, if you take a flatworm, like a planaria, and you cut it into pieces, each piece can regrow into a brand new, complete worm. I mean, that's just an incredible feat.
But there's a really important distinction to make here. As amazing as regeneration is, it's not really the same thing as reproduction, you know? Most animals aren't just sitting around hoping they get cut up so they can make babies. It's more of a fantastic survival and repair tool that, in some cases, can also lead to reproduction.
Okay, so we spent all this time talking about making copies, but this brings up a massive question. Are those copies ever perfect? 100% identical? Because the answer to that question changes everything, and it introduces a concept that is absolutely key to survival: variation.
So let's really think about that. Are these copies, made from just one parent, ever truly identical? The answer is the secret to survival on a global scale.
And the simple answer is no, they're not. Look, no biochemical reaction in the universe is absolutely 100% reliable. So every time DNA gets copied, there are going to be some tiny variations, little glitches. And these subtle differences, these tiny mistakes in the copy, are literally the raw material for all the amazing diversity of life we see.
So why is that so important? Okay, picture this. You've got a population of bacteria, all happy in a pond. If the world never changes, being a perfect copy is fantastic. But what if something does change? What if, say, the water temperature shoots up? A whole population of identical clones could get completely wiped out, all of them. But if just a few of them have a random little variation that happens to make them resistant to the heat, they survive, they reproduce, and the species carries on. Variation, my friends, is survival insurance.
Now, those little copy errors in asexual reproduction create variation, but it happens pretty slowly. So nature came up with another strategy, one that doesn't just wait for mistakes, but actively shuffles the genetic deck to create diversity way, way faster. And that, of course, is sexual reproduction.
I mean, it just makes sense, right? If having a variety of traits is so crucial for surviving in a changing world, wouldn't it be smart to have a system that can speed up the process of creating new combinations?
And that's precisely what sexual reproduction is all about. Instead of one parent making a copy of itself, it takes the genetic blueprints, the DNA, from two different individuals and mashes them together. This creates a totally new, completely unique combination of traits in every single kid.
Okay, but wait. This brings up a bit of a math problem. If you take a full set of DNA from one parent and a full set from another, wouldn't the offspring end up with double the DNA? That would not work. The solution is just brilliant. Organisms developed special cells, we call them germ cells or gametes, that carry only half the normal amount of DNA. So when a half cell from one parent combines with a half cell from the other, bingo, you're back to the correct full amount of DNA in the new individual. Problem solved.
So let's make this a little more concrete and talk about the example we all know best: humans. We, of course, use sexual reproduction, and our bodies have evolved these amazingly complex and intricate systems to make it all happen.
You have the male and female systems, and they're specialized for different but totally complementary jobs. The male system's main role is to produce and deliver the male germ cells, the sperm. The female system, on the other hand, produces the female germ cell, the egg, and is also designed to be the place where fertilization can happen and where a new baby can be nurtured as it grows.
And that journey from two tiny cells to a new person is just a biological marvel. It all starts with fertilization, when a sperm fuses with an egg. That new embryo then travels and implants itself in the wall of the uterus. From there, this incredible organ called the placenta develops, which lets the embryo get all the oxygen and nutrients it needs from the mother's blood. And after about 9 months of incredible development, the whole process ends with birth.
So let's just step back and summarize these two grand strategies for a second. On one hand, you have asexual reproduction. It's fast, it's efficient, and it's perfect for quickly filling up a stable environment with a design that you know already works. On the other hand, you've got sexual reproduction. Its main game is generating variation, giving a species the flexibility and adaptability it means to survive when the world inevitably changes.
And that really is the key takeaway here. No matter how you get it, whether it's through those slow, random copy mistakes or the fast-paced shuffling of genes, variation is what gives life its resilience. It might not always benefit a single individual, but for the survival of the species over the long haul, it is everything.
Which, of course, leaves us with one last mind-bending thought. All of these strategies, this whole biological obsession with creating variation, it's all feeding into something much, much bigger. So if these tiny variations are the fuel, what's the engine they're powering? What is this grand, overarching process that uses this constant stream of newness to sculpt every single living thing on this planet?
Welcome to The Explainer. You know, have you ever looked in the mirror and thought, wow, that's my mom's smile, but those are definitely my dad's eyes? It's this really incredible personal mystery that we're going to dive into today, cracking the code of heredity. I mean, it's a question we've all asked ourselves, right? How in the world do you end up with this totally unique mix of features from your parents? It can feel kind of random, but here's the thing, it's not. There are actually rules, almost like a hidden instruction manual that controls this whole amazing process. Okay, so here's a really simple example. Go ahead, feel your earlobes right now. Are they attached to the side of your head or do they hang free? I know, it seems like such a tiny, insignificant detail, but it's actually a clue. It's one small piece of this giant puzzle of inheritance, a puzzle that, believe it or not, we can actually decode. So we know we get our genetic material from both parents, right? About half and half. But then why aren't we just a perfect blend of them? Why isn't every kid's height exactly halfway between their moms and dads? Well, it's because there are rules that decide which traits actually win out and get expressed. And to really get a handle on these rules, we've got to travel back in time. We're going to a monastery garden way back in the 19th century, because it's here that one man, working with simple garden peas, was about to change, well, pretty much all of biology. And this is the guy right here, Gregor Mendel. Now, he was a monk and he was a gardener, sure, but the really critical part? He was also a scientist and a mathematician. And by mixing those skills together, careful observation with just systematic counting, he saw patterns that for centuries everyone else had completely missed. Okay, so this is where his genius really shines. See, other people before him just sort of observed nature. But Mendel, he controlled it. He was super careful, selecting plants with very specific contrasting traits. He meticulously controlled who bred with whom. And the most important part, he counted everything. He treated biology like it was a math problem, and that's how he finally found the hidden patterns. All right, so let's walk through one of his first and probably most famous experiments. It all started with a simple cross, but it led to a result that was, well, pretty puzzling. And it changed everything. So Mendel starts with this really controlled setup. He takes plants that he knows are purebred. What that means is his tall plants always made more tall plants, and his short plants always made more short plants. No surprises. Then he crossed them. So what do you think would happen if you cross a tall plant with a short one? Maybe you'd get some medium-sized plants or a mix of tall and short? Well, the actual result was a total shock. Every single one of the new plants was tall, 100%. Not a single short plant to be found. This right here led to the big question, the key that would unlock the whole secret of heredity. I mean, where did the short trait go? It just vanished. Or did it? And this is where the real magic happens. Mendel takes that generation of all tall plants and lets them self-pollinate. And guess what? The lost trait came back. All of a sudden, he had short plants again. And the numbers were really consistent. About 3/4 of them were tall and 1/4 were short. So the trait for shortness wasn't gone at all. It was just hidden. This observation was his first huge breakthrough. He figured that some traits must be dominant, meaning you only need one copy of the instruction for that trait to show up. And other traits are recessive. They kind of get hidden or masked by the dominant one. The only way a recessive trait can show up is if you get 2 copies of its instruction. Now, Mendel didn't know what these things were. He just called them factors. He had no idea what they were made of. But his work basically laid the entire foundation for modern science to go find them. And today, we know exactly what they are. We call them genes. That's the modern word for Mendel's factor. And here's a great way to think about it. Imagine your DNA is this massive cookbook. Well, a single gene is like one recipe in that book. It's the set of instructions for building one very specific thing, usually a protein. And this pathway is how it all connects from the code to the real world. Let's go back to those pea plants. The gene for a tall is basically a recipe for a protein that helps the plant grow a lot. The short gene is a slightly different recipe, maybe for a protein that doesn't work quite as well. So if a plant has even one copy of that super efficient tall recipe, that's enough to make it grow tall. That right there is dominance in action. And this is what brings it all together. For this whole dominant and recessive thing to even work, you have to have 2 copies of every gene. And where do you get them? Well, you get 1 copy from your mom and 1 copy from your dad. These copies are neatly packed into these structures inside our cells called chromosomes. Okay, so now that we've got a handle on how dominant and recessive genes work, we can use that exact same logic to explain one of the most fundamental traits there is, our biological sex. Turns out it's also all about inheritance. So inside pretty much every single one of your cells, you have 23 pairs of these chromosomes. Now, 22 of those pairs are basically matching sets, but it's that last pair, the 23rd pair, that's special. It's the one that holds the key. And here's how it works. For human females, that 23rd pair is a perfect match, 2 X chromosomes. But for males, it's a mismatched pair. They have 1 X chromosome and 1, much smaller, Y chromosome. So let's look at how this plays out. A mother has 2 X chromosomes, right? That means every single egg she produces can only carry an X chromosome. There's no other option. So every single one of us, no matter what, gets an X chromosome from our mom. That's a given. So the deciding factor has to come from the father. Since he's XY, about half of his sperm will carry an X and the other half will carry a Y. So it's pretty simple. If a sperm with an X gets to the egg first, you get XX, a girl. If a sperm with a Y wins the race, you get XY, a boy. It's the father's contribution that determines the sex of the child. So let's wrap this all up. It all started with Mendel's peas. And here's the bottom line. Our traits are passed down through these things called genes. We get 2 copies of every gene, 1 from each parent. And it's that constant dance between dominant and recessive genes that creates all the incredible variety we see in the world. And this quote really just captures the whole idea so perfectly, doesn't it? Inheritance gives us our common blueprint, the things that make us human. But it also provides all those subtle little changes that make every single one of us completely unique. And that leaves us with one last really big question to think about. We've seen that our genes are the blueprint. They provide the instructions. But just how much of who you are is actually written in that code? Where does the blueprint end, and where do you begin?
Have you ever really looked at your reflection? I mean, not just to check if you have something in your teeth, but to actually wonder, how is that even possible? Well, today we're pulling back the curtain on the science behind the everyday magic of mirrors.
But hang on, before we even get to mirrors, let's ask an even bigger question. How do we see, well, anything? Why isn't the world just a big, dark, empty space? What's actually happening that lets our eyes perceive the world around us? The answer, is actually pretty simple, and it comes down to one word: reflection. Light from a source, say the sun or a light bulb, zips out, hits an object, and then bounces off. When that reflected light makes its way into our eyes, our brain does its thing, and boom, we can see. It's all about that bounce.
Okay, so think about a normal, everyday flat mirror. It's predictable, right? You look into it, and you see a perfect copy of yourself. It's upright, it's the same size, and it looks like it's the same distance behind the mirror as you are in front of it. Simple, reliable, follows the rules. But what happens when we start to bend those rules? By literally bending the mirror itself.
This is where things get really fun. We're going to move from those boring flat surfaces to something I guarantee you have in your kitchen right now: a simple, shiny spoon.
Yeah, that's right, a spoon. It's actually the perfect way to understand curved mirrors because it's 2 different kinds of mirrors joined together. You've got the inside part, where the soup goes, and then you have the outside bulging part. So here's the key difference. When that reflecting surface curves inwards, like the inside of the spoon, we call that a concave mirror. Just think of it like a cave. It caves in. And when the surface curves outwards, like the back of the spoon, that's a convex mirror. 2 sides of the same spoon, but they act like 2 totally different mirrors. So how do these curves actually mess with the image we see? Why does your reflection look so bizarre and distorted in a spoon? Well, it all comes down to how they bend the path of light. So let's take a look at how these images are actually put together.
This is where you see the real superpower of a concave mirror. It can take parallel rays of light, like the ones coming from the sun, and focus them all down to a single, tiny, super bright spot. This spot is called the principal focus, and it can get so intense you can actually use it to set a piece of paper on fire. This is the main thing to remember about concave mirrors. They converge light. They bring it together.
So how do we predict what we're going to see? It's not just random. It's actually like a blueprint for light. By just tracing the paths of a few of these key light rays as they bounce off the mirror, we can see exactly where they'll cross over. And that point where they intersect, that's precisely where the image is going to show up. It's like playing connect the dots with physics.
And this just shows you how wild the concave mirror really is. Depending on how close you are to it, the image completely transforms. If you're really far away, the image is tiny and upside down. But as you get closer, it starts to get bigger. And then, when you get really close, inside that focus point, it suddenly flips right side up and becomes huge. It's a genuine magic show of optics.
Okay, now let's flip the spoon over to the convex side. Unlike its complicated cousin, the convex mirror is incredibly predictable. I mean, it doesn't matter where you put an object in front of it, the image is always upright. It's always smaller than the real thing, and it's always what scientists call virtual. It is super consistent, and as we're about to find out, that consistency is extremely useful.
Right, so this isn't just theory or fun with spoons. We've actually built our world using these exact principles. Let's look at where you can see the physics of curved mirrors working all around you every single day.
Remember how that concave mirror makes a big, magnified, upright image when you get up close? Well, that's exactly why they're used for shaving or makeup mirrors, and dentists use them for the very same reason, to get a huge, detailed look at your teeth. But they can also work in reverse. You put a small light bulb at the focus point and it shoots out this powerful, parallel beam of light. And that is the secret behind your flashlight and your car's headlights.
And that brings us to a question you have definitely asked yourself while sitting in a car. You know that little warning on the passenger side mirror? Why is it there? What is that mirror doing that makes reality a little bit deceptive?
The answer is it's a convex mirror. Because the image it creates is always smaller, it tricks our brain into thinking things are farther away than they actually are, hence the warning. So why in the world would we use it? Simple, because that outward curve gives the driver a much wider field of view. You can see way more of the road and what's in your blind spots. It's a safety trade-off. Your distance perception is a little off, but your overall awareness is way better.
You know, everything we've talked about so far, from the spoons to the car mirrors, it's all based on this one simple idea, that light travels in nice, predictable, straight lines. But what if that's just a useful simplification? The true nature of light? It's so much weirder. For centuries, scientists argued back and forth. Is it a wave or is it a particle? Turns out modern quantum physics has a mind-bending answer. It's kind of both and neither, all at the same time.
And that just leaves us with a final thought to chew on. We've built this entire predictable world of reflections and mirrors by simplifying light down to these straight lines. But we know the truth is so much deeper and more complex. So the question is, if our simple model of light can reveal so much, what other wonders are hiding in the things we see every single day? What else might we be missing?
All right, today we're tackling one of the most incredible pieces of engineering in the known universe, the human eye. We're going to break down how this tiny little organ works like a living camera, and then we'll zoom out to see how the physics of light creates the amazing, colorful world we see every single day. So let's just start with this one big question. I mean, think about it. How does this small, kind of squishy ball in your head manage to capture everything from a huge mountain range to the tiniest details on a person's face? It seems almost impossible, right? Well, the best way to get our heads around it is to think of the eye as a super advanced, self-focusing camera. It's this biological marvel that grabs light and literally in a fraction of a second turns it into the rich, detailed pictures that we call reality. Okay, so let's actually trace the path of light as it travels through your eye. It's a journey with 5 really key stops along the way, and each one has a critical job to do to form a perfectly clear image. So the whole trip starts at the cornea. That's the eye's clear outer layer, and it does the first big bend of the light. From there, the iris, the colored part of your eye, acts just like a camera's aperture. It opens and closes the pupil to control exactly how much light gets in. Next up is the lens, which does the really crucial fine-tuning, adjusting the focus so a sharp image lands on the retina. Now, the retina is like the camera's sensor. It's this light-sensitive screen at the very back of the eye. But here's the crazy part. The image it sees is actually upside down. It's the optic nerve that grabs that upside-down info, sends it to the brain, and your brain does the final magic trick of flipping it right side up so we can make sense of it all. Now, what really truly makes the human eye so different from a regular camera is its superpower. It's called accommodation. See, instead of a rigid, fixed lens, our eye's lens can actually change its shape on the fly to shift focus between something way off in the distance and something right in front of your face, all in an instant. And this is all thanks to these tiny little things called ciliary muscles. When you look at something far away, These muscles are relaxed, and that lets the lens get thinner and flatter. But the moment you look at something up close, like your phone, those muscles contract, squeezing the lens and making it thicker and more curved to nail that sharp focus. But even this superpower has its limits. For a young person with pretty normal vision, the absolute closest you can see something clearly without any strain is about 25 centimeters. We call that the near point. Any closer than that, and those ciliary muscles just can't squeeze any harder. Of course, sometimes this perfectly tuned system, well, doesn't work so perfectly. For a lot of us, that journey of light gets a little bit off track, and the focus point doesn't land exactly where it's supposed to on the retina. You've probably heard of the two most common issues. First, there's myopia, or nearsightedness. That's where light focuses in front of the retina. So you can see things up close just fine, but things far away get all blurry. The total opposite of that is hypermetropia, or farsightedness. In this case, the light wants to focus behind the retina, making it a real struggle to see nearby objects clearly. Thankfully, the solution to these problems is actually pretty simple and elegant. We just use corrective lenses to give the light a little nudge in the right direction before it even gets into the eye. I mean, that's the whole idea behind glasses and contact lenses. So take myopia. The light is focusing too early, right? So we use what's called a concave lens. This type of lens spreads the light rays out just a tiny bit, and that has the effect of pushing the focal point back so it lands perfectly on the retina. It's a really brilliant, simple fix to a complex problem. And, as we all get older, that amazing accommodation superpower can start to wear out a bit. There's a condition called presbyopia, where those ciliary muscles get weaker and the lens itself just isn't as flexible as it used to be. This makes it really hard to focus on things up close, which is why so many people end up needing bifocals, that clever invention with two different prescriptions in one lens to help you see both near and far. All right, so now we have a pretty good idea of how our eyes actually see light. So let's zoom out. Let's explore how light behaves on a much bigger scale as it travels through our whole atmosphere, creating some of the most beautiful light shows in nature. I'm sure you've seen this before, maybe in a science class. When you shine a beam of white sunlight through a glass prism, it magically splits into a whole spectrum of colors. This happens because each color of light actually bends or refracts at a slightly different angle, and we call this splitting effect dispersion. So just think for a second. A beautiful band of colors streaking across the sky, usually when the sun is out. Does that sound familiar? I bet it does. Well, this is exactly how rainbows are made. After it rains, the air is full of millions of tiny, suspended water droplets. And each and every one of those droplets acts like a tiny little prism. It takes in sunlight, splits it into all its colors, and reflects it back toward your eye. It's incredible. But the physics of light doesn't just explain rainbows. It also answers one of those classic questions we all ask as kids: why is the sky blue? The answer is a phenomenon called scattering. See, our atmosphere is packed with tons of tiny particles, air molecules, dust, you name it. When sunlight comes barreling in and hits these particles, it doesn't just pass straight through. It gets bounced around and reflected in every single direction. But here's the absolute key. Those tiny particles are way, way better at scattering light with short wavelengths, like blue and violet, than they are at scattering light with long wavelengths, like red and orange. It's just a rule of physics. So picture this. You look up on a sunny day. The sunlight is streaming down. While the red and yellow light pretty much makes a straight shot for the ground, that blue light gets scattered all over the place by the atmosphere. And because it's coming at your eyes from every direction above you, the entire sky just looks blue. Okay, this leads to a really important real-world application. If blue light is the color that scatters the most, what about the color that scatters the least? This is exactly why we use red for stop signs and danger signals. Because it has that long wavelength, it's scattered the least. That means it can cut right through things like fog, smoke, and rain better than any other color, so we can see it from farther away. It's a lifesaver. We've gone from the huge physics of the sky all the way back to the biology of our own eye for one last pretty amazing fact. Our eyes can actually live on after we're gone. Through corneal donation, the gift of sight can literally be passed from one person to another, a profound act that can completely change someone's world. So, when you think about it, from the tiny biological lens inside our own eye to the massive expanse of the atmosphere, our entire experience of sight is shaped by the fundamental laws of physics. It kind of makes you wonder what other parts of our everyday reality are being quietly run by these same invisible rules.
It powers our entire world, it lights up our nights, and it's literally running through the device you're watching this on right now. But what is electricity really? Well, we're going to pull back the curtain on this fundamental force by thinking of it as something we all know, an invisible river flowing all around us. It all kicks off with a really simple question. We flick a switch, and boom, a dark room is flooded with light. But what's actually going on inside that torch? And spoiler alert, it's not magic. It's the result of basically opening the floodgates for that invisible river.
Let's just really hammer this home. A river is a flow of water, right? Well, electricity is just a flow of electric charge. It's a current, just like a water current, but it's all happening inside these tiny little metallic wires. This invisible river idea, that's the key to understanding everything.
All right, so let's get a bit more specific. What exactly is this flow? Let's define it. Okay, so this flow is what scientists call electric current. And all that means is it's the amount of charge that zips past a specific point in a wire over a set amount of time. It's the rate of flow. And we measure this in a unit called amperes, or amps for short, named after the French scientist André-Marie Ampère. Now here's a fascinating little historical quirk. See, when scientists first started studying this stuff, they didn't know about electrons. They had to guess, and they guessed that the current was a flow of positive charges. So, by convention, we still draw current flowing from the positive end to the negative end. But in reality, we now know it's the negatively charged electrons flowing the other way. It's a strange detail for sure, but for our purposes, we're just going to stick to that original conventional direction. So, for our river of charge to flow, it needs, well, a riverbed. And that's what we call an electric circuit. The key thing is it has to be a continuous, unbroken loop. Think about the switch on that torch again. When you turn it off, you're actually creating a break in the path. You've blown up the bridge. The river can't flow, and the bulb goes dark. When you turn it on, you're completing the path, and the current can flow once more.
Okay, so let's build one piece by piece. Every simple circuit needs these 4 basic parts. First, you need a source, like a battery cell. That's what provides the energy, the pressure. Second, you need a load, like the bulb, which is the thing that's going to use the energy. Third, you need the path, which are just the wires that guide the flow. And finally, you need the control, the switch, that lets us open or close that loop.
All right, so now we know what flows and where it flows, but what actually causes the flow to happen in the first place? And just as important, what's trying to stop it? A river doesn't just flow on flat ground, right? It needs a slope, something to get it moving. Water in a horizontal pipe isn't going anywhere without a pump pushing it. So what's the electrical version of that slope, or that pressure for our river of charge? The answer is something called potential difference, but you probably know it by its common name, voltage. This is the electric pressure, the push that gets the charges moving along the wire. A battery's whole job is to create this potential difference between its two ends. And the higher the voltage, the bigger the push. We measure it in volts, a hat tip to Alessandro Volta. But it's not a perfectly smooth ride. As those little electrons move through a conductor, they're constantly bumping into the atoms of the material itself. This opposition, this kind of electrical friction, is what we call resistance. Some materials have super low resistance, others have incredibly high resistance. And we measure this in a unit called ohms. So we have our 3 big ideas: the push, which is voltage, the flow, which is current, and the friction, which is resistance. And it turns out there is one beautifully simple relationship that connects all 3 of them.
Way back in 1827, a physicist named George Simon Ohm figured this all out. He discovered this amazing direct relationship. The more push or voltage you apply to a wire, the more flow or current you're going to get. It's a simple direct proportion that links these 2 forces.
And that amazing observation gives us this incredibly simple but seriously powerful equation. V equals I times R. Voltage equals current times resistance. With just this one little formula, you can figure out any one of those values if you just know the other 2. It's that powerful. Let's see this in action to make it real.
Let's say we have an electric heater, and it has a resistance of 15 ohms. Now, if we apply a push of 60 volts, we get 4 amps of current flowing through it. Simple enough. But what happens if we double the push to 120 volts? Well, since the resistance of the heater itself hasn't changed, the math tells us the current has to double too. And what do you know? It goes to exactly 8 amps. It works perfectly, just like Ohm's law predicts.
So Ohm's law is this great universal rule. But that R for resistance, it isn't just some random number. It's actually determined by the physical properties of the wire itself. So what is it about a wire that makes it more or less resistant?
Well, it really boils down to 3 main things. First, its length. It's pretty intuitive. The longer the wire, the more friction the charges run into, so the higher the resistance. Second is its area. A thicker wire is like a wider river. It allows more flow, so it actually has less resistance. And finally, and this is the big one, the material it's made of.
You see, every single material has this built-in fundamental property called resistivity. It's basically a measure of how much that material naturally wants to resist the flow of electric current. A material with really low resistivity, like copper, we call that a conductor. And one with crazy high resistivity, like rubber or glass, well, that's an insulator.
And when I say the difference is big, I mean it's absolutely massive. Just look at this. Copper has an incredibly low resistivity. Then you have something like nichrome, which is an alloy we use in heaters, and its resistivity is about 1,000,000 times higher. And then you get to glass. Its resistivity is astronomically higher than that. This huge range is what lets us control electricity, funneling it where we want it with conductors and stopping it cold with insulators. And that is exactly why we pick and choose our materials for specific jobs. We use copper for electrical wiring because we want the current to flow with as little friction as possible, nice and efficient. But for a toaster or an electric iron, we want the exact opposite. We use an alloy like nichrome because it has high resistance. That resistance is what turns electrical energy into useful heat, and just as important, it can get super hot without burning up.
So if you remember just one thing from all this, let it be this core relationship. The flow of our invisible river, that's the current, is created by the push of the voltage and is held back or limited by the friction of resistance. Push, flow, friction. It's kind of mind-blowing, right? This constant interplay of push, flow, and friction is happening right now in every single device around you. From the simplest little light bulb to the most powerful supercomputers on the planet, these fundamental principles are running the show. So the real question is, now that you understand the rules of this invisible river, what other technological mysteries do you think you can solve? I'll leave you with that. Thanks for tuning in.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a hidden force, an invisible link between electricity and magnetism. And believe me, this connection, it literally powers the world we live in.
So, think about electricity. You flip a switch, a light comes on. You turn on a stove, it gets hot. Heat and light, right? But what if it could do something else? What if it could create motion? Exert a force invisibly, right through thin air? Well, that very question is where our story begins. So here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with a completely accidental discovery, then figure out how to actually see these invisible fields. From there, we'll look at the magnetic signature of electricity itself, see the incredible force it can create, and finally, look at how we use this force every single day.
All right, let's jump right in, because this whole area of science didn't start with some grand, planned-out experiment. Nope. It started with a total accident.
Picture this. It's 1820. A Danish scientist, Hans Christian Ørsted, is in the middle of a lecture. And right there, in front of everyone, something happens that was not in his notes, something that would completely change science as we know it.
So here's what he saw. He had a compass on his desk, and every time he sent an electric current through a wire nearby, the compass needle, which should only ever point north, went haywire. It twitched. That was it. That was the moment, the very first proof that electricity and magnetism weren't separate things at all. They were connected.
But to really get what Ørsted saw, we need to understand what a magnetic field actually is. How do you even begin to picture an invisible force?
Okay, so a magnetic field is basically a magnet's zone of influence. It's this invisible area all around it where its power, its push, and its pull can be felt.
And this is how you make the invisible visible. It's so cool. You just sprinkle some tiny iron filings around a magnet, and look, they snap into place,
tracing out these beautiful lines of force. They literally draw us a map of the magnetic field.
And these patterns, they're not random at all. They follow a few very specific rules. By convention, they always flow out of the North Pole and loop around into the South Pole, forming these perfect closed curves. And you see where the lines are all bunched up together? That's where the field is the strongest. And the most important rule of all, no two lines will ever cross.
Okay, so we've got a handle on the field from a regular magnet. Now let's loop back to Ørsted's discovery and see what the magnetic signature of an electric current actually looks like.
Well, it turns out an electric current flowing through a straight wire creates a magnetic field that looks totally different from a bar magnet's. It produces these perfect concentric circles, with the wire sitting right in the middle, like a bullseye.
And the strength of this field? It's not fixed. It's actually pretty intuitive. The more current you pump through that wire, the stronger the magnetic field gets. And just like when you back away from a campfire, the farther you get from the wire, the weaker the field becomes. Simple as that. So, we know the field is made of circles, but which way are they spinning? Clockwise? Counterclockwise? Well, there's a brilliantly simple way to figure it out. Just imagine grabbing the wire with your right hand. If you point your thumb in the same direction the current is flowing, the way your fingers curl around the wire, that's the direction of the magnetic field. It works every time.
All right, a straight wire is cool and all, but what happens if we take that same wire and coil it up, wrapping it around and around into something called a solenoid?
The result is, well, it's incredible. All those little circular fields from each loop of wire, they add up. They combine to create one big, powerful, unified field that looks exactly like the field from a classic bar magnet. It's got a clear north and a clear south pole. And this is a huge deal because we've just created a magnet that we can turn on and off with a simple switch. That's a game changer.
Okay, so let's recap. We've established that an electric current creates its own magnetic field. Now we get to the really powerful part, the big consequence of that simple fact. This leads us to the next logical question, right? We have our wire happily making its own little circular magnetic field. But what happens if we take that wire and put it inside another, bigger magnetic field, like say between the poles of a strong horseshoe magnet?
Well, those two magnetic fields, they can't just ignore each other. They interact. They push and they pull on one another. And the end result is a real physical force that acts on the wire itself and actually makes it move. And you guessed it. There's another awesome hand trick for this. This time, use your left hand. Just make an L shape with your thumb and forefinger and stick your middle finger straight out. If your forefinger points in the direction of the magnetic field and your middle finger points in the direction of the current, your thumb will point in the exact direction of the force.
Now this whole thing, turning electricity and magnetism into actual movement, it's not just some fun little lab experiment. This principle is, without a doubt, one of the most important discoveries in the history of technology. I mean, think about it. This is the secret sauce that makes electric motors spin. In your fan, your blender, in an electric car. It's how loudspeakers turn electrical signals into the sound waves you hear. It is everywhere. This invisible force is the engine that drives our modern world.
So if you walk away with just one thing today, let it be this simple three-step idea. An electric current creates a magnetic field. When that field interacts with another magnetic field, it creates a force. That's it. Electricity becomes motion.
And that brings us to one last fascinating thought to leave you with. We've seen how electricity can create a magnetic field. But what if we flipped that whole idea on its head? What would happen if you took a magnet and just moved it past a wire? What could that create? Well, that question, that opens up a whole other can of worms.
Have you ever really thought about the connections all around us? I mean, the ones we can't see. We're going to explore that hidden web today, the one that links everything.
Take this, for example. How is the sunlight on your face connected to the food on your plate? It sounds a little philosophical, right? But the answer is actually a beautiful, complex network that, well, keeps us all alive. Let's follow that thread and see where it leads.
Okay, so to unravel all this, we've got to start with the absolute basics. We have to talk about the ecosystem. You can think of it as the stage where the entire drama of life plays out. So what exactly is an ecosystem? Well, it's pretty simple when you break it down. It's all the living things, the organisms, interacting with each other and with all the non-living things in any given area. It could be a massive forest, or it can be as small as a little pond.
Now, every single ecosystem has two key parts. On one side, you have the biotic factors. That's all the living stuff, plants, animals, even the tiniest microbes. And on the other side, you've got the abiotic or non-living factors. We're talking about things like temperature, sunlight, wind, and the soil itself. These two sides are in a constant dance, always influencing each other.
And if you want a really great way to picture this, just think of an aquarium. It's a perfect little example. You've got the fish and the plants, that's your living part. And you have the water, the light, the oxygen, the non-living parts. They're all working together to create this tiny self-sustaining world. It's a whole ecosystem right there in a glass box.
And within this little world, you've got three main characters, three key players. First up are the producers. Think green plants. They're the ones making their own food using sunlight. Then you have the consumers, who get their energy by, well, consuming other organisms. And finally, you have the decomposers, the essential cleanup crew, like bacteria and fungi, that break everything down and return nutrients to the system. You absolutely need all three for it to work.
So, we've met the players. Now let's follow the energy. How does the energy that plants capture from the sun actually make its way through the rest of the ecosystem?
It all moves through something we call a food chain. It's basically a simple who eats who list. And each step on this chain, from the plant to the thing that eats the plant to the thing that eats that thing, is called a trophic level. It's just a way of saying a feeding level.
Now here's a wild fact for you. Those plants, the producers at the very bottom, they only manage to capture about 1% of the sun's energy that actually hits them. Just 1%, and that tiny fraction is the foundation for pretty much all life on this planet. So, when a consumer comes along and eats that plant, how much of that precious energy actually gets passed on?
The answer is just 10%. That's it. It's known as the 10% rule. It means that at every single step up the food chain, a huge amount of energy is lost, mostly as heat, just from the process of living.
And this chart here just shows it perfectly. Let's say the producers at the bottom have 100% of the energy available. The primary consumers that eat them, they only get about 10% of that. And the secondary consumers that eat them, they're down to just 1%. You can see how fast that energy just disappears. And this is exactly why you don't see super long food chains out in nature. It's not a coincidence. By the time you get 4 or 5 levels up, there's simply not enough energy left in the tank to support another layer of predators. The physics of it just don't work out.
So these natural systems are in this delicate balance. But of course, what happens when we humans show up and start introducing things that don't belong? Well, our actions can have these massive, unintended consequences that ripple through the whole system.
And one of the most troubling effects is called biological magnification. It's what happens when harmful chemicals, stuff our bodies can't break down, get into the food chain. They don't just pass through, they build up, they magnify.
Let me just walk you through it. So pesticides get sprayed on crops, and they seep into the water and soil. Plants then absorb those pesticides. Then a small animal eats a whole bunch of those plants, and that toxin gets concentrated in its body. Then a bigger animal eats a whole bunch of those little animals, concentrating it even more. You see where this is going. By the time it gets to the top of the food chain, where we often are, that toxin can be at dangerously high levels. Now, our impact isn't just limited to the food we eat. It goes all the way up, into our atmosphere. High above our heads, there's a natural shield protecting all of us from the sun's most harmful UV radiation. It's the ozone layer.
So how is ozone even made? Well, it's this really cool natural process. High-energy UV light from the sun zaps an oxygen molecule, that's O2, and splits it into 2 separate oxygen atoms. Then, one of those free-floating atoms hooks up with another oxygen molecule, and voila, you get O3, which is ozone. It's a cycle that's constantly happening.
But back in the 1980s, scientists figured out this protective layer was getting dangerously thin. The culprit? Man-made chemicals called chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs. They were in everything from refrigerants to spray cans. But here's the hopeful part of the story. The world actually came together. A landmark international agreement in 1987 started phasing out CFCs, proving that we can actually take action to fix the problems we create.
And that really brings us to where we are right now. We're faced with choices every single day, and this is especially true when it comes to the mountains of waste that we produce.
You can basically sort our waste into 2 big buckets. You've got your biodegradable waste, things like food scraps that microorganisms can break down naturally. But then you have the non-biodegradable stuff, like plastics. And that stuff, it just doesn't go away. It sticks around for a very, very long time.
This quote right here really hits a nail on the head. We created disposable cups for a good reason, to be more hygienic. But at the time, nobody was really thinking about the massive new problem they were creating: mountains and mountains of waste. It's a perfect example of an unintended consequence. And trying to find a better solution is so much harder than you'd think. Okay, so plastic cups are bad. What about traditional clay cups? They're biodegradable, which is great, but making them at a massive scale actually erodes fertile topsoil. So now we've moved to paper cups, but guess what? They have their own environmental footprint too. It's a never-ending series of trade-offs. And that really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? The connections in our world are so complex, and the consequences of our actions are never simple. There are rarely easy answers. So maybe the real challenge is just learning to see the whole picture, to understand those invisible connections, so we can start asking the right questions before we make a choice. It's definitely something to think about.